When we think of the world in terms of civilizations, it's in large part due to work of Arnold Toynbee and his monumental study of history. In this book, he describes civilizations as entities responding to a crisis, a challenge, and this response is what forms them as unique, as coherent civilizations as such. So let's rank them in the only objective way possible, a tier list. Um, Actually, it's entirely subjective, but I would try to rank them according to their response or answer they would give in the face of crisis or challenge in their history. So we'll start with Minoan. Minoan is a civilization on Crete. It's, to put it simply, Proto-Greek civilization. We don't know very much about them. They had great art. Here's the bull. So their palace system, organized on Crete, was pretty fitting for their conditions, and they managed to unite the whole society around it. But as such, it wasn't very global or extensive, so I think I'll put them in the middle, a B tier. So Minoan B tier. Then we have the ancient Chinese. So it's the Shang dynasty. Well, it's the first dynasty we know something mm, material about from archaeology, and it was the one of the first to actually unite the Chinese heartland. But mm, thing is, although it's very important for Chinese history, for the foundations of the Chinese state, it shares some of the features with Minoan civilization in terms of um, it's not yet whole or developed in its ideas and in its presentation. So um, it's a stepping stone. Something maybe greater. We'll put it in B tier. Next, we have the Indus Valley civilization. Um, it's interesting. Um, they had unique art and architecture. They also had a writing system not yet deciphered, but it was a writing system. Uh, they managed to tame the river and build an extensive network, and they even traded with the Middle East. But still, um, they faded away, and they eventually were replaced as a population in this region. So even though it's a beautiful civilization, we'll have to put it in C tier. Next up, Egyptiac, as it's called in Toynbee's work. Basically, Egyptian and adjacent cultures. Uh, Egyptian is S tier. So Egypt is one of the most lasting and culturally rich civilizations you could find. And as for its influence, it spanned the whole Middle East at some point, and still it lingered in Greek culture and in later cultures. Some even would argue it was transferred to the west. It gave us the characters for our well, for letting writing via some derivatives. So Egyptian isn't truly an S tier, even though it went extinct. I would argue it went extinct uh, after it's exhausted its capabilities, let's say. And you could even say it has lived on in the form of Egyptian Christianity, so it's an S tier. Then we have the Sumerian. The Sumerian people were, well, as profoundly important for the Mesopotamian region and this uh, more eastern part of the wider Middle East of the Fertile Crescent. Uh, they were supplanted, though, by Semitic peoples, and they gave them their cuneiform writing and their culture, and it lived on in this form, but they weren't so united and they were more distant from the other peoples, let's say, in terms of their cultural influence and significance throughout the ages. Both Egyptian and Sumerian civilizations were tasked, let's say, by their challenging environment, and they organized brilliant irrigation systems. So, in terms of their response to the crises that they faced, they were outstanding mostly. But I could only put Sumerian in the A tier, lower than Egyptian. Then we move on to Americas and we find their Andean civilization. So, Andean is probably B tier. The Incas were masters of many crafts and they organized a wide spanning empire. So, their challenge was obviously mostly the mountainous terrain and the climate they found themselves in, and they adjusted very well. They didn't have writing, they didn't have the wheel, so while using the resources they had um, in some good ways, they didn't make very much progress due to uh, multiple reasons. Um, so they are in the middle, the B tier. Next up, it would be the Mayans. Actually, the arrangement is maybe questionable, but okay, let's go with the Mayans. The Mayans are another um, American indigenous civilization, um, the Central American one. The Mayans had a system of towns, cities interconnected. They managed to organize it well, but they faced a crisis. When they did face it, um, if I remember correctly, it would be 11th to 12th century AD. They their empire basically collapsed. So we would have to put them in the C tier. And then we have it would be Yucatec, as Toynbee names them. They would probably be called Olmecs. Uh, these were the first, well, not the first, but the um, large influential culture arriving to the Central America before Aztecs and Mayans. Um, their presence was significant, and well, their challenge was basically probably their migration itself. to the region. Um, but I don't quite mm, remember what are the challenges Toynbee ascribes to them. Still, um, they left a lasting presence. These giant heads they produced, and they're unique. Um, they're in the C tier, but they're important as the forerunners, let's say, before Aztecs and Mayans. Then we move on to Mexican civilization or Aztecs. So Aztecs are similar to Mayans in some ways, but different in others. They were a culture of warriors in part, and they had an intricate system of basically vassal states, tributary states, however you want to name them in our mm, Western terms. Mm, Nevertheless, they are probably B tier, and they lasted longer than the Mayans. That's one thing. Um, they had bloody rituals and sacrifices, but basically, you could argue all all of the peoples had war, and they had a culture around conducting war or even sacrificing their captives. And well, one can appreciate that. Next up, we have Hellenic. Um, Another S tier. Hellenic as a culture is very rich, and despite not having the best lands uh, in Greece proper and in Asia Minor, Greece developed to be a cornerstone of uh, basically European culture and even Asian, um, having influence on the whole of Western Asia. Hellenic conquests proved that um, Greeks were militarily capable, but then the Hellenic period proved that Greeks were able to intermingle with all the cultures that they've conquered and to produce variants of Greek or rather Hellenic culture that would last in those regions. So for that, they're S tier. Next up, we have Syriac societies. Those are basically your Phoenicians, your Hebrew, your um, all the Aramaic populations of Syria and Iraq. Mm, it's a very important culture or a collection of cultures in terms of giving many other civilizations their religion in the form of monotheism, which was actually pretty rare in world history, a rare occurrence, and the developing the writing system that we use today. So still, they were really separated, and their challenge would probably be standing up to larger empires from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from Persia, and while they crumbled, basically, most of those states, they still lived on. Um, some in diaspora, some mm, inside the realms that they've inhabited now, but they weren't united and they didn't present a coherent, let's say, structure, let's say, state or collection of states after they've been conquered and reduced to minorities in the region. So we'll have to put them in B tier, acknowledging their cultural, really one time, once in a lifetime historical influence. Then we have the Cynic culture. So the developed Chinese civilization mm, would be probably Han Dynasty and afterwards. Cynic culture, Cynic civilization has to be S tier. It's the premier culture, or rather civilization of East Asia. It produced the framework for Confucian culture, for Far Eastern Buddhism, uh, Taoism. Um, it's well, it's China in terms of being an empire in the center of the Eastern world, Far Eastern world, and the donor, cultural donor for the Japanese, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, and so on. So China, classical China is S tier. Then we have the Indic civilization, so classical India after the Aryan conquest. So all the Hindu classics were developed back then, and well, you have to rate Hindu civilization really high. They were challenged by having many peoples inside their empires and many religions, and having to deal with that, mm, having to mm, develop their some one religion like Buddhism, or switching to others, or allowing them to coexist like in China, and there were different answers for them, more so when Islam came around. So it was remarkable, but wasn't, despite having largest population and being India, being rich, being culturally developed, and having the most influential works in religious literature, it's an A tier, not an S tier. Then we have Hittites. So Hittites were an empire in modern Turkey, Asia Minor. It was so they adopted cuneiform from Mesopotamia. They had relations with Egypt and Mesopotamian empires like Assyria. They had war, they had peace. The famous Ramses Hattusili's treaty, peace treaty that was preserved in Egyptian and Hittite is remarkable. But in and of themselves, they are not, in my opinion, a separate or mm, well influential civilization. They're mostly, they were really significant for European scholars in the 19th, 20th century because they were the first Indo-European people to have left some kind of writing in their language, but that in and of itself doesn't pull it any higher than the D tier. So we have our first D tier with the Hittites, Hittite civilization. Mm, because I'd rather say it was not a civilization, because we see that there are many countries and regions that are kind of left out in this overarching view, and if those very prominent ones are left out. Hittites should have been left out. So yeah, sorry, D tier. Then we have Babylonian civilization. It's developed from Sumerian one. It's the High Mesopotamian civilization, Assyria and Babylonia. Um, they had Akkadian Semitic language, but they wrote in cuneiform. Basically, I would say, actually, to return for a bit to Hittites, I would say they would be the extension of Babylonian civilization if we assume this wide overarching view. So, in and of themselves, um, they were real, they were important, and they managed to build lasting empires in Babylonia and Assyria, continuing the irrigation trend and the assimilation of peoples who came by, the nomads. They settled and adopted Mesopotamian culture. So A tier. Next up, Western. Western civilization is an S tier. So the West dominated the world from the 18th century onwards and probably continues in some way, although it has competition, of course. European military prowess was unchallenged for a good 200 years, and it made it possible for them to conquer and settle every continent basically, and make modernization and industrialization synonymous with the West. Um, the West has many things to be critiqued for, but thing is, the critique of the West, of Western Orientalism, Western colonialism, is also nested within the European Western tradition. So that's what makes it the self-reflection, self-critique makes it lasting, makes it able to basically um, provide those answers, those responses for different challenges it faces. And although the other prominent author, Oswald Spengler, did say about 100 years ago that the West is falling, uh, some would argue it's still falling, but it's a long fall. So uh, maybe it's a flying trajectory rather than falling. Next up, we have two Orthodox civilizations, and the first the first branch is the Russian Orthodox civilization. So the Russian state was and always been, almost always has been strong and on European and even in the world mm, arena. It was mm, a serious threat, a serious uh, force to be reckoned with. That's one hell of a thing for to achieve for a civilization. But when it comes to it, it was and the culture accompanying it in tandem with European, but also uh, responding to in different ways, in their own unique ways. The Russians were mm, they made a complex and strong civilization. But as far as their influence, their prominence from those responses in the ages, they weren't particularly attractive for uh, the world as a whole. Communism might have been, such universal tenet that they could that they produced, well, basically implemented and it could offer, but it fell. So Russia is always strong, but never reaching the mm, never reaching the most influential and unique civilizations. And some would think it's too similar to the Western, but just a branch of it. Toynbee did describe a really big significance to the religious aspect. So, as an Orthodox civilization, it's the top of the Orthodox ones. It's an A tier. Uh, Orthodox Byzantine. Byzantium was a real deal. In some centuries, it was mm, for some time regarded as this universal empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. Mm, it's a progenitor to the Russian civilization, but then it fell, and much as the Syriac peoples was reduced to a minority inside the or inside a larger empire. One I would say would deserve maybe its own civilization spot, the Ottoman Empire, but it's not here. But the Byzantine Orthodoxy is a great culture, but as a civilization, it fell pretty mm, early and it never recovered. It basically continued, one would argue, in the Russian state somewhat, some of its tendencies. Then we have the Persian civilizations as a branch of civilizations stemming from Islam. Persians, mm, rather, um, it's rather unique in its ways. While being an Islamic civilization, uh, it was, well, in terms of their religious composition, they soon became mostly Shia, a mm, minority in the world, in world's terms, sect of Islam. So even their religion is unique in that way. And the Persian court culture, their poetry, their influence on many regions, India, Central Asia, um, it's mm, really deserves a spot in the A tier. So Arabic civilization, that would be the main uh, bulk of Islamic civilization, and I don't know how exactly to rate the Arabic civilization in terms of there's pre-Islamic Arabia, then there are Islamic conquests, and then the Arabs are all over the place. But well, these are great conquests. Then there's the crisis of Islam after the golden age of Islam, and I would say that since the crisis of Islam, with in terms of how to modernize in the Ottoman Empire, decline of the Ottoman Empire, decline of many other states, Arab states. Mm, see, I lump in Ottoman Empire with the Arab civilization. So since there is no separate spot for Ottoman Empire, but since those challenges are arguably not answered still, we're entering the modern civilizations. So I don't know how to rank for example, Arab civilization's response to modern nation states. There are different answers about religion and its role, about the mm, preserving the role of religion while creating new states. There are Arab monarchies and there are republics which are very different in terms of also in terms of uh, the quality of life and their well modernization efforts. So it's an incomplete picture still. So yeah. Now we enter modern Chinese civilization. I would say it shares the ranking for them shares some problems with ranking Arab civilization up to the modern times because there's of course China the it's a pretender for a hegemony in the world and they're a serious deal. But the challenges they face are still present. The new challenges, and the decline of birth rates, the economic transformation, and the particular ways of how would they assert their hegemony and actually administer or rather deal with other nations there that's still in the making. But Chinese civilization is very strong, modern one. So uh, can be less than nature, but also incomplete response to mm, to rate them to give them S tier. The Western history is of course still incomplete as well. Um, but I would say as of now, the age of European dominance is mostly probably over, but will leave in its shadow. And 100 years ago, in Toynbee's time, it was evident, and it's still evident that Europe performed militarily and scientifically as an S tier. And also, I stress that self-critiquing nature of it actually does make it S tier. Um, although, due to its complexity and this ever challenging, even self challenging, self crippling sometimes nature, um, Europe may very well easily fall from S tier, but it's still there, probably. Now, this is Far Eastern, meaning Korea, Japan, basically. And also, no separate spot for Southeast Asia, which is a shame. But Korea and Japan are mm, great in terms of, well, especially Japan, in terms of how they dealt with the modernization challenge while preserving their traditions. But they also have new challenges. Many of them are similar to China. They'll go near modern China to the A tier. Then we have the modern Indian civilization. India is a well sleeping giant. India will be and probably even is the most populous nation and still climbing, still growing even higher in this first place. India is a whole subcontinent, uh, as all of the modern civilizations we've mentioned. It has a rich tradition, steeped in, well, in its previous form here in Indic, classical Indian civilization. Mm, it's yet, I wouldn't say its responses are mostly unknown to me. India did get its independence after the most of Toynbee's work, which was a feat. and but the wars with Pakistan were a problem, and still the relations are a problem. Two large nuclear powers at each other's throats sometimes. So at the I don't I don't know many of the challenges in their phases. It's a sleeping giant, but I don't know how to assess it right now. So with that, here's our tier list. We have many S tier civilizations, many A tiers as well. Feel free to chime in and try and correct me if you would argue some of those are different tiers. And thank you for watching.